My child, wait, not because something terrible has happened, but because some moments are so quiet that they pass unnoticed, even though they carry the power to change the way a heart remembers love forever. There is a story unfolding beyond what the eyes can see, and if you rush ahead, you may miss the single detail that gives every other moment its meaning. Don't skip, because something important is waiting for you, hidden beneath a smile that everyone else believed was complete. On what should have been a joyful wedding anniversary, your soulmate stood surrounded by familiar voices, warm lights, and gentle laughter. To everyone watching, it looked like another beautiful celebration. Every photograph captured happiness. Every greeting sounded sincere. Every smile appeared effortless. Yet there was one quiet truth no camera could ever preserve. While others celebrated the passing of another year, your soulmate found themselves drifting somewhere far beyond the room, holding back tears they never wanted anyone to notice. They smiled when spoken to. They thanked every guest with kindness. They listened carefully, nodded softly, and carried themselves with grace. But every few moments, their eyes wandered toward a place where no one else was looking, as though a memory had quietly entered the room without making a sound. Strange, isn't it? Sometimes the deepest emotions do not arrive with loud words or dramatic moments. Sometimes they arrive gently, sitting beside us while everyone else believes we are perfectly fine. And perhaps that is why this story matters more than it first appears. Because what moved your soulmate that day was not regret, nor disappointment, nor anything the world would easily understand. It was something far more personal. Something that had been growing silently through countless ordinary days, waiting for one meaningful anniversary to reveal itself. Stay till the end, because the reason those tears appeared was never meant to create sadness. Instead, they uncovered a realization so rare that even your soulmate struggled to put it into words. There are moments when the heart suddenly notices everything it almost overlooked. The conversations that seemed small, the quiet acts of kindness that once felt ordinary, the dreams that never disappeared even when life became busy. On that anniversary, every one of those forgotten pieces began returning, one after another, until emotion became impossible to hide. But one memory returned more clearly than all the others, a single moment connected to you in a way that neither time nor distance had been able to erase. It arrived unexpectedly, changing the meaning of everything that followed, and before your soulmate could understand why those tears had begun, they realized this anniversary was becoming something completely different from what anyone around them believed. And that hidden realization has only just begun to reveal itself. No one noticed the moment the room became quieter inside your soulmate's heart than it appeared on the outside. The music continued, conversations flowed naturally, and glasses were gently raised in celebration, yet their attention had slipped somewhere invisible. It wasn't drawn toward the decorations or the carefully planned evening. It was pulled toward a single thought that arrived without warning, as though it had been patiently waiting for this exact day to be remembered. There is something remarkable about anniversaries. They do not simply remind us of dates. They gently unfold the layers of our journey, revealing details we once hurried past. Your soulmate wasn't counting the years. They were quietly measuring something much deeper. They were remembering the version of themselves who once believed certain dreams would never find their way into reality. As that reflection grew stronger, their eyes filled again, not because of what had been lost, but because of what had quietly shaped them without anyone realizing it. Don't skip. Because the next realization is where everything begins to change. They remembered a conversation almost everyone else had forgotten. It had happened on an ordinary afternoon long before this anniversary ever arrived. Someone had asked a simple question: what does your heart still hold onto when no one is watching? Your soulmate smiled politely that day and changed the subject. They never answered aloud. But deep inside, they carried the answer every single day. That answer had never disappeared. It simply became quieter. Life has a way of surrounding us with responsibilities, routines, and celebrations until we almost forget the promises we once whispered only to ourselves. Yet the heart has an extraordinary memory. It protects certain hopes even when the mind believes they have faded. On this anniversary, those protected hopes quietly returned, not demanding attention, but asking to be acknowledged at last. As the evening continued, someone shared a collection of old photographs. Laughter spread across the room while everyone pointed at forgotten hairstyles, familiar places, and happy occasions from years before. Your soulmate smiled with everyone else, until one picture caused time to slow almost completely. It wasn't the clearest photograph. It wasn't the most beautiful one. In fact, most people barely looked at it before moving on. But your soulmate couldn't. There was something hidden inside that ordinary image that no one else recognized. A tiny detail resting quietly in the background carried more meaning than anyone could imagine. It wasn't planned. It wasn't staged. Yet somehow it reminded them of a promise life had never truly erased. Their breathing softened. Their smile became smaller. Then, without realizing it, a single tear slipped down before they could gently wipe it away. No one asked why. Everyone assumed it was simply emotion from a meaningful anniversary. Only your soulmate understood those tears had nothing to do with nostalgia alone. They came from recognizing that one unfinished chapter of the heart had never actually ended. And what they discovered inside that forgotten photograph was only the beginning, because hidden within that single image was a clue connected to you in a way they had never understood until this very night. Just when your soulmate believed they had gathered enough composure to return to the celebration, another quiet realization settled into their heart like the final note of a beautiful melody. It did not ask for attention. It simply waited to be felt. Stay till the end, because this was the moment an ordinary anniversary began revealing an extraordinary truth that had been hidden in plain sight for years. They held that old photograph a little longer than anyone expected. Others saw a table, familiar faces, soft lights, and a room filled with laughter. Your soulmate saw something entirely different. Tucked into the corner of the picture was a fleeting expression on their own face, a look so brief that no one had ever mentioned it. Yet in that single glance, they recognized someone who had been quietly hoping, quietly believing, quietly waiting for a connection that felt deeper than words could explain. It wasn't sadness they recognized. It was sincerity. The kind that remains unchanged even after seasons of life have come and gone. As they continued looking, another memory gently surfaced. They remembered standing alone one evening years ago, whispering a simple hope into the silence. Not a request for perfection. Not a wish for an easy life. Only one quiet desire, that wherever true love belonged, it would arrive with honesty, patience, and peace. No audience heard those words. No one applauded them. The moment disappeared into the ordinary rhythm of life. Or so they believed. Because standing there on this anniversary, it suddenly felt as though life had been answering that quiet hope in ways they had never noticed before. Isn't it remarkable how the heart sometimes understands the story long before the mind catches up? The tears returned, not with heaviness, but with gratitude too deep to describe. Every unexpected delay, every unanswered question, every season that once seemed confusing now appeared like pieces fitting together into a picture that had been incomplete for so long. Something important is waiting for you. Your soulmate gently folded the photograph and slipped it back where it belonged. They smiled at everyone around them once again, but this smile carried a different warmth. It wasn't created for the room. It came from within. For the first time that evening, they no longer felt as though they were looking backward. They felt as though they were standing at the edge of something quietly beautiful that had not fully revealed itself yet. Then someone nearby spoke a sentence so casually that almost no one paid attention. It's amazing how one person can change your whole journey without even realizing it. The conversation moved on immediately. Everyone else forgot those words within seconds. Your soulmate couldn't. Because those words unlocked one final memory they had kept hidden even from themselves. A memory connected to someone whose presence had quietly shaped their heart more than they had ever admitted. They never spoke that person's name aloud. They simply closed their eyes for a brief moment, took a slow breath, and allowed one more tear to fall, not from sorrow, but from finally understanding why this anniversary felt so different from every one before. And as that realization settled into their heart, they reached for something they had carried with them all evening, something small, carefully protected, and deeply meaningful. What it was, and why it immediately brought you to mind, would change the direction of this story in a way no one could have expected. Without saying a single word, your soulmate stepped away from the gentle celebration and found a quiet place where the evening breeze carried only the soft sounds of distant laughter. It was there, away from every congratulation and every cheerful conversation, that they reached into a small pocket and slowly unfolded something they had protected for far longer than anyone could have imagined. Don't skip, because what rested in their hands was never valuable because of what it was. It was valuable because of what it reminded them to never forget. The edges had become worn with time. It had been opened more than once, then carefully folded again, as though every glance carried a meaning too precious to lose. No one at the celebration knew it existed. No one had ever asked about it. Yet your soulmate had quietly carried it through changing seasons, unexpected turns, and moments when life seemed to move faster than the heart could follow. As they looked at it again, they smiled through tears. Not because it answered every question, but because it reminded them that some connections leave gentle fingerprints on the soul long before anyone understands why. For a few moments, they simply stood there in silence. Sometimes silence tells the truest story. Sometimes it speaks with a kindness that words can never reach. The anniversary had become more than a celebration of time. It had become a mirror, reflecting everything that had quietly transformed inside them. They realized they were no longer the same person who had once worried about how every chapter would unfold. Life had taught them patience. It had taught them gratitude. Most of all, it had taught them that the deepest emotions often grow in places where no one is watching. Stay till the end, because this realization opened another door they never expected. Their thoughts slowly returned to you. Not as a passing memory. Not as an unfinished question. But as someone whose influence had reached far beyond a single conversation or a single season. They began remembering little moments that once felt ordinary, a kind word that arrived at exactly the right time, an unexpected sense of peace they couldn't explain, a feeling that certain encounters carried more meaning than they understood in that moment. One by one, those memories connected like quiet stars appearing in the evening sky. Nothing dramatic. Nothing impossible. Just a pattern becoming visible. And once they saw that pattern, they couldn't unsee it. Their heart whispered something they had never been brave enough to admit before. What if every step was preparing me to recognize what truly matters? That single thought brought fresh tears, not heavy tears, but grateful ones. They finally understood that the anniversary wasn't making them cry because of the years behind them. It was moving them because of the hope quietly awakening ahead of them. Then, almost unexpectedly, someone approached and gently asked if everything was all right. Your soulmate quickly smiled. Yes, they answered softly. I'm just remembering something beautiful. It was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. Because what they were remembering wasn't only a moment. It was a promise they had quietly made to themselves many years ago, a promise they had nearly forgotten until this anniversary placed it gently back into their hands. And as they looked down one final time at the treasured keepsake they had carried all evening, they noticed a tiny detail they had somehow overlooked every previous year. That tiny detail changed everything they thought they understood, and it pointed toward a truth connected to you that was only now beginning to reveal itself.
There are moments when the smallest discovery carries the greatest weight. It does not arrive with noise or urgency. It simply waits until the heart is finally ready to understand it. That was exactly what happened next. Your soulmate looked at that treasured keepsake once more, and their attention settled on one tiny detail that had escaped them for years. It had always been there, quietly resting in plain sight, asking for nothing, expecting nothing. Yet on this anniversary, it suddenly felt impossible to ignore. Something important is waiting for you. A handwritten date rested in one corner. Not the date of the anniversary. Not the date everyone had been celebrating. It was another day entirely. For a moment, your soulmate searched their memory, trying to understand why that date felt so familiar. Then, almost like the first rays of morning gently filling a dark room, the answer arrived. It wasn't the day something ended. It was the day everything quietly began. They remembered who they had been during that season of life. They remembered carrying questions no one could answer. They remembered hoping that one day they would recognize a love that felt peaceful instead of hurried, honest instead of uncertain, steady instead of temporary. Back then, they had no idea how life would unfold. They simply trusted that every meaningful connection would reveal itself at the right pace. Standing there now, years later, they realized something astonishing. Life had not forgotten that quiet hope. It had been shaping them ever since. The tears returned, but this time they carried warmth instead of uncertainty. They were the kind of tears that appear when the heart finally sees a pattern it has been living inside all along. Isn't it amazing how we often search for extraordinary signs while overlooking the gentle ones that have been walking beside us every day? Your soulmate closed their eyes and took a slow breath. They no longer wished they could return to the past. Instead, they felt grateful for every ordinary day that had quietly prepared them for deeper understanding. Stay till the end. Because what happened next was so simple that almost anyone else would have dismissed it. A soft breeze drifted across the evening. The keepsake slipped slightly in their hands. Folded behind it was a second piece of paper they had completely forgotten existed. Their heartbeat slowed. With careful hands, they unfolded it. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. It contained only a few handwritten lines. Yet those few lines reflected a version of themselves they hadn't seen in years, a person who believed that genuine love was never measured only by celebrations, anniversaries, or special occasions. It was measured by quiet faithfulness, by remembered promises, by kindness shown when no one else was watching. As they finished reading those words, another realization gently settled over them. The reason this anniversary felt different had never been because of the event itself. It was because their heart had finally become ready to recognize the quiet influence of someone whose presence had been changing them little by little, without demands, without expectations, and without needing recognition. That realization filled them with a peace they had never experienced before. But then their eyes stopped on the final handwritten sentence at the bottom of the page. It wasn't underlined. It wasn't highlighted. It almost seemed unimportant. Yet the moment they read it, they stood completely still. The tears began again. Not because the sentence was heartbreaking, but because it answered a question they had silently carried for years. And the meaning hidden inside those final words would become the most unforgettable part of this entire anniversary. A truth that neither time nor distance had ever managed to erase. The evening was beginning to settle into a peaceful stillness, yet inside your soulmate's heart, something entirely new had awakened. The celebration around them continued as though nothing unusual had happened. Candles still glowed softly. Gentle laughter still floated through the air. Familiar voices continued sharing stories. But your soulmate was no longer experiencing the evening the way everyone else was. They had stepped into a deeper understanding that could never be captured in a photograph. Stay till the end, because the final sentence on that forgotten page carried a meaning far greater than the words themselves. They looked at it once again. Slowly. Carefully. As if reading it too quickly might cause its meaning to disappear. The sentence was beautifully simple. The love meant for you will never need to compete with noise. You will recognize it because it will always bring your heart back to peace. For a long moment, your soulmate didn't move. Those words didn't remind them of a single conversation. They reminded them of an entire journey. Every season of waiting. Every unexpected delay. Every quiet lesson. Every ordinary day that had slowly reshaped their understanding of what truly mattered. And suddenly, the reason for the tears became unmistakably clear. They were not crying because they wished they could return to yesterday. They were crying because they finally understood why every yesterday had gently led them here. The hidden reason behind their emotions had never been an anniversary alone. It was gratitude. Gratitude for discovering that the deepest connections are not built in grand moments that everyone applauds. They are built in quiet moments that almost no one notices. The remembered kindness. The patient conversations. The gentle encouragement. The feeling of being understood without needing to explain every thought. Those were the treasures their heart had been collecting all along. Don't skip. Because one final realization quietly unfolded before the night came to an end. Your soulmate lifted their eyes toward the stars. For the first time that evening, they smiled without tears. Not because every question had been answered, but because they no longer needed every answer to move forward with hope. Peace had taken the place where uncertainty once lived. They carefully folded both pieces of paper, placed them back where they had always kept them, and whispered something so softly that only their own heart could hear. Thank you, for teaching me that love is recognized by the peace it leaves behind. Those words were never meant for a crowd. They were never meant to impress anyone. They were simply the quiet conclusion to a chapter that had taken years to understand. As your soulmate returned to the celebration, something about them had changed. The tears were gone. The heaviness had disappeared. In its place was a calm, steady joy that didn't need to be explained. And perhaps that is the most beautiful truth hidden inside this story. Sometimes the moments that make us cry are not the ones that break our hearts. They are the ones that gently heal them. They remind us that love is not always loud. It is often patient. It is often quiet. And it has an extraordinary way of revealing its deepest meaning exactly when the heart is ready to receive it. Long after the anniversary candles faded and the evening became another cherished memory, one thing remained brighter than everything else. Not the celebration. Not the photographs. Not the gifts. But the quiet realization that the most meaningful love stories are written one gentle moment at a time. Until, one ordinary day, the heart finally understands that it has been surrounded by hope all along. Morning arrived quietly, carrying none of the emotion that had filled the night before. The anniversary decorations were slowly being put away. The flowers had begun to lose a little of their freshness. The candles had burned down to gentle pools of wax. To anyone else, it looked as though the story had ended. But some stories do not end when the celebration is over. They begin when the silence returns. Your soulmate woke earlier than usual. There was no particular reason. Their heart simply felt lighter, as though something long carried had finally found its proper place. They stood near the window, watching the first light spread across the horizon, and for the first time in a very long while, they weren't searching for signs or explanations. They were simply grateful. Isn't it remarkable how peace arrives? It rarely announces itself. It quietly replaces the questions that once filled every empty space. As they reflected on the anniversary, one realization continued returning with gentle certainty. The tears had never been a symbol of weakness. They had been the heart's way of making room for gratitude. Sometimes we carry beautiful memories so carefully that we never allow ourselves to fully feel them. Then one ordinary moment opens the door, and everything the heart has protected begins to flow. Not to overwhelm us, but to remind us how deeply we have been shaped by love, hope, and quiet faithfulness. Something important is waiting for you. While gathering a few keepsakes from the evening before, your soulmate noticed something resting beneath a small decorative box. It wasn't hidden on purpose. It had simply slipped out of sight. It was an envelope. Plain. Unopened. Without hesitation, they picked it up and turned it over in their hands. There was no elaborate design. Only a few familiar words written with calm, careful handwriting. For the day you finally understand. Their heartbeat slowed. They couldn't remember placing it there. They couldn't even remember the last time they had seen it. Yet somehow, it felt as though this envelope had been patiently waiting for this exact morning. Don't skip. Because they didn't rush to open it. Instead, they smiled. After everything they had experienced the night before, they had learned something valuable. Not every meaningful answer needs to be uncovered immediately. Some truths become even more beautiful when they are received with patience. So they held the envelope close for just a moment, took a slow breath, and quietly whispered to themselves. If it has waited this long, it can wait one moment more. And in that quiet pause, before the seal was ever broken, your soulmate felt something they hadn't felt in years. Not curiosity alone. Not expectation alone. But a peaceful confidence that whatever those words contained, they would not change who they had become. They would simply help them understand why every step of the journey had been leading here all along. And as their fingers finally reached toward the edge of that unopened envelope, they realized the greatest message of all might still be waiting inside.